fly fishermen.
Yeah.
Bill Hansen coming in. We're at 85. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead, mute all, and I'll ask Mike, Zach, and Derrick to unmute themselves, and we'll get started. All right?
Go for it.
I'm here.
Okay. Zach, it looks like you're good.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm on.
Yeah, I'm good too.
Mike's good.
Yep.
All right, let's get this game started. Awesome.
Let's go. So I just want to say welcome to all of our visitors and fishing friends. We're very excited to have Zach and Derrick present tonight for a presentation on winter fly fishing on the Farmington. You guys obviously know them well because you're here. I only have a couple of things to get out of the way. CVTU did gaiters and masks. And anybody who's coming to the ugly sweater party on Saturday, I will have these with me. You don't have to be a CVTU member to buy them. If you want one, they'll be there. And if anybody who isn't going to be there wants one, you can just contact me and we'll get one to you. The ugly sweater party is this Saturday. It is going to be masks required, socially distancing required, all the things that we need to do because of COVID. The only real change from last year is we cannot do any common food or drink. So if you want to have food, you have to bring your own. And we will be meeting at 10, fishing until, usually we fish till about 1, depending on conditions, temperatures, whatnot. And then we go to the stone fireplace at People's and have a fire for a couple hours and spend some time. So you're all welcome to come. My Entomology chapter is going to be joining us, and I haven't heard from the Nutmeg, but they usually have a couple of people show up too. And then for the CVTU guys, there were 3 trees that came down on the upper part of Al's Trail, just south of the kiosk. So if you want to get into the Pootutuck down there, you kind of got to go across the feeder creek or go in from the commerce side, at least until the Parks Department takes care of those trees. I called Amy Mangold today, and they're going to try to do it ASAP, but she said it might be a week or so before they get to it. So that's all I have. So without further ado, Derrick, Zach, take it away.
All right, guys. Zach and I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and joining in. Hope everybody's doing well. What we're going to try to adhere to is going through 4 sections here for winter fishing. We're going to go through dressing appropriately and layering, and then we're going to talk about early winter, midwinter, and late winter. And we're going to pause in between sections to answer questions that you have based on those sections. Try to stick to what we're talking about. And then I'm sure at the end we'll do a longer Q&A. So, all right, so we'll kick this off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Just for questions, there's 88 of us now on the call. So for questions, please use the chat feature. Go down to that lower part of the screen, hover over the options, click chat, and chat your questions into the chat screen. They should go to everyone so that we can all see the questions, and then we'll go through them at the end of each section. All right, Derrick, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, man. All right, so dressing appropriately. Starting off with waders, there's kind of everybody has an opinion on neoprene versus breathable. And in my humble opinion, I prefer breathable waders. It just allows me to be, a little more dexterity and breathable. And if you really layer properly, I don't find that I'm ever like too cold. Zach made an interesting comment, like maybe if you were like standing still for a super long time, maybe in a deeper section, it might provide a little extra warmth. But for the most part, in the winter, we're still moving around a lot, and that's how you generate heat. So I don't really find that the breathables, take away, or that and the neoprenes are any advantage, as long as you're layering properly. If you're not layering properly, then you're most likely going to get cold in anything.
Yeah,
Zach, you got anything to add to that, man?
No, I totally agree. In addition to, being warm enough, if you're moving, those neoprenes, they're buoyant. So if I'm moving around and, somewhat, moving water, my mobility is not there. And I'm way more apt to go down if I'm wearing neoprene waders. So yeah, definitely agree with the fact that the breathables are, in my mind, the choice.
Yeah. The other thing is, so like boots, when you're walking around in snow, like felt is you're gonna get a lot of snow sticking to your feet. One major thing that I'll tell you to watch out for is a couple of companies offer studs that they call them like way bars or wear bars. And they're just straight, like, I don't know if it's a certain kind of aluminum that's, they grip rocks well, but they grip black ice horribly.
Yeah, they're
So,
like keys.
yeah, you will bust it if you're wearing those. So just a heads up, if you were fishing those in the spring and you're like, looking to see how they're going to do in the winter, not so much. You're better off going with, your typical studs, for winter, and always keep that in mind. You're going to be walking on ice, to and from spots. Just a little safety precaution, like if there's any ice and you're going, downhill or whatnot, always get low, because the last thing you want to do is get hurt, but yeah, back to layering. So your first base layer is one of the most important, and basically all of these layers that we're going to be talking about, they all wick moisture incredibly well, because if you're getting sweat moisture up against your body, you're going to get cold super quick. So there's a bunch of different companies out there, but like Silk Long underwear are nice. They're incredibly light. They generate a lot of heat when you walk around, but overall durability, like you might get a couple seasons out of them, but they can kind of get chewed up, some of them fairly easy. There's also like EMS and Patagonia, they have like their versions of like Capilene. Those are all good layers. So your first layer is really important. You need a high quality layer. And unfortunately, this stuff isn't cheap. Your second layer, you also want to have a really good layer. And sometimes, in extreme cold conditions, I may have what we're calling these mid layers now. I may have 2 mid layers.
Yeah.
The important thing is that you can add or subtract layers. So it's always good to bring extra clothes along with you, in the wintertime, and you can kind of adjust as to what's going on. Your mid layers, again, your EMS, I'm sure Orvis, Sims, they all have good mid layers that you can get from them. Again, just bring more. Zach, what are some of your favorite mid layers? I know you said you like, some wool.
Yeah,
kind of
wool.
in the mix there.
Wool, definitely. It's gonna, again, wick stuff away from you.
Yeah.
It definitely holds a lot of heat. The Sims, I can't remember the exact name of it, but they make it's a 4 out of 5 rating. I use that as my outer layer.
Okay.
And then if it's super cold, I have the Pre-Beloft Sims pants. It's basically like down, gonna hold a lot of air and separate you from the water. But I actually do a little cheat trick, because you start putting all these layers on, you start losing mobility. You become the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. There's some body heating pads that have an adhesive to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I can, if I'm going out and it's like Arctic, you know, teams,
Yeah.
I'll put a couple of those body adhesive, you know, they're just the same thing as hand warmers, but they have an, you know, they're larger and they have an adhesive back. And I'll actually put a couple on my arteries on my inner thigh and a couple of them on my heart. So I'm circulating warm blood and, you know, through my extremities all day, and I'm not cutting down on my mobility when I need to be covering lots of ground, you know, because
Yeah. And these adhesives, Zach, you're not putting them, you know, under your first layer. Like there's usually like 2 layers in between.
yeah.
If
Yep.
you can get, just to be clear, folks, those can
Yeah,
get pretty darn hot. So you don't want to put them like.
Yeah, I put them over my wool layer.
Yeah,
My second layer.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what about socks, right? Like I've talked to a few people that fish in cold weather and everybody has their opinions. I mean, I tend to go with like one high quality pair of sock and that tends to work with me. What about you, Zach?
Yeah. I'll fish, you know, when I'm going to be fishing in the real cold stuff, I'll have one, you know, one of those like silk under socks and then a wool one on over that.
Yeah, I've heard of those. My buddy was talking about that the other day, wearing that really super thin layered one, and then a good pair of wool, right?
Or and I have another pair of wool that's like, it's basically 2-in-1, super heavy socks. But that's only if it's really Arctic. Biggest thing I'd say about with the socks, I think, you know, too many people are focusing on how many socks they should have on. I think guys are wearing their, you know, the wade boot that they're going to wear during the summer. I have a wade boot that I'll, you know, have a size up so I can fit more, you know, more socks in and not cut off my circulation.
Right.
You know, and make sure not to tie my boots too tight. You know, you got to have that blood flowing in there. So.
Yeah, those are really good points. Circulation's huge. You don't want anything uptight. And if it's not tight, you're also going to create friction when you're moving around, which is going to create heat. You don't want anything tight. You know, in really cold water temps and weather, you can start to lose your feet. And once you start to lose your feet, you're better off getting out and just warming up a bit. I mean, if you stay in there too long, you're going to get tight and your chances increase of going down, especially, you know, the older we get, the harder it becomes. But a little trick to get your feet somewhat back to normal is to do, this is an old ice climber trick, is if you stand up straight and let's say you're going to do your right leg first, your left leg is completely straight and you're going to swing your right leg, and you want to try to keep your right leg as straight as possible as well. And you're going to swing for, you know, a 30 count or a 60 count. And what that's going to do is that's going to pull the blood back down into the bottom of your feet. It's going to bring you warmth a lot quicker, you know, than anything else really, if you're standing still. You know, if you do that and then you move upstream, if you're covering ground and you start walking, that's really going to build the heat up pretty quick for you. But that's just a little trick. We'll try to give you guys, you know, as many little tricks throughout this presentation that we can to deal with the elements. But bottom line is you can be very comfortable for the most part, you know, throughout the winter. We've talked about upper layering. Lower layers are somewhat the same. You know, we have our good base layer. We have, you know, I'll use like fleece line Sims pants. Zach was saying, talking about the pants he used. And, you know, that's pretty much it as far as layering underneath, you know, like I'm pretty good with that. But back to what Zach said, just about having room, and again, keep that in mind. You know, you don't want to be real stiff because, you know, the elements are going to stiffen you up as well as your clothing. So you want to stay as loose as possible.
In addition to that, I'll add something else. I will kind of like your trick. I'll get out of the river if I'm starting to lose my legs. I'll get out of the river and do some jumping jacks if I
Yeah.
need to get that blood flowing. Also, if you gotta pee, even slightly, if you gotta pee, get out and pee, because your body's going to be expending a lot of extra energy to keep that pee warm in you. So I honestly, it's like turning the heat up a couple of degrees if I get out and just go pee,
Oh yeah.
because you know that's going to make you real cold. Because and you know your body's natural reaction when it's real cold like that is to dehydrate itself. So a couple of cups of coffee and real cold weather, all of a sudden you got a lot of pee, and don't hold it. Get out and go.
Right.
Not to get nasty, but just do it.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. You know, obviously stay hydrated, like Zach was saying too. So let's talk about your hands, right? Because, you know, when you're fly fishing, you're tying, you know, all these knots and everything else. Dexterity is huge. You can't lose your hands. And fingerless gloves are like, you know, I think it's like you have to have them. I mean, there might be some warmer, there might be some warmer days where you might be able to get away with it, but you're going to be sticking your hands in the water if you're catching fish, reviving fish, and so forth. So, you know, my favorite fingerless gloves are by a company called Barber, and you can get them through Orvis.
Yeah.
They're Barber fingerless gloves. And I know wool's not the, you know, most comfortable thing to wear on bear skin, but wool will retain its warmth properties when it gets wet. And for me, that's huge. I mean, I do a lot of ice fishing where, you know, I can stick my hands in an ice hole and pull a fish out and take these gloves off and shake them off, shake the water out and put them back on my hands, and they're going to stay warm. Things like fleece,
No
good. Like basically you got to think of it this way. Like it doesn't retain warmth like wool does. And you're going to be putting ice on your hands if it's that cold, you know, like neoprene or something like that. It's water's going to bead and it's going to freeze. Now Zach, he sometimes will use, Zach, tell him about the gloves that you use.
So I've been pretty happy with my Sims gloves. They protect from the wind. They're fingerless. Yeah, they have an inner fleece lining, but which I don't think is genius. But to combat that, you know, that my hands getting wet, I wear nitrile surgical gloves instead of latex, and that keeps my hands dry. So that wind chill factor with you know, on my wet hands isn't really a factor anymore because my hands are actually dry, and I still remain, you know, able to tie knots and have the proper dexterity to be changing the rig when I need to throughout the day. But you know, big thing I see, because I know a lot of people are starting to do it as well, because I've been teaching a lot of people. I'm seeing a lot of people that must be just throwing their gloves out, because, you know, so if you're going to be taking those nitrile gloves down to the river, make sure you take them back with you, or put them back down, you know, into a pocket, because I'm seeing a lot of gloves on the river lately.
Yeah, agreed.
But so that really helps me out. And the thing that I like about the nitrile versus the latex, if you've got a hook point in that latex, it just shreds over your finger. Whereas the nitrile can take several punctures and not shred over your finger. So the nitrile gloves with those Sims, you know, wind guard gloves, have been, you know, the answer for me over the past few years. Oh, another thing I want to add is they make the same glove, and several companies do, where you have this option to have this mitten come over the fingerless section. Now, on paper, that looks good.
Yeah.
But I see several people that I've guided over the years that it's just getting caught in that little flap all the time, and they're fumbling with the line and not able to manage their line properly. And, you know, when you're fishing an opportunistic bite in the winter, you might have 2 or 3 drifts through that little, you know, that run and that little drop off or that little micro environment where if you don't drift properly, you're going to spook that fish. So if you're messing around with getting your freaking line off that, you know, looks good on paper, mitten overlap, no good.
Right. Agreed. Completely agreed. So we spent a bit of time on layering. It's really important, guys, because, you know, people, you know, some people might be like, oh, how do you fish in the middle of the winter? That can't be fun. It's like, well, I'm not cold. So, you know, that's the key, is you want to be comfortable. You're not going to enjoy it if you're constantly cold. Every now and then, sure, we can get cold, but you want to be comfortable. The only thing I think we may not have completely covered is your outermost layer. And for me, I have 2 types of outermost layers. I mean, both of them are going to cut wind 100%, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, in really cold conditions, but there's no wind. Sure, I can get, you know, I can get away with a jacket with, what are the insulated jackets? I'm drawing a blank here. Zach, the Permaloft ones or the
Primaloft, yeah, Primaloft.
Permaloft. Thank you. Those are great because they're extremely light. Like, one thing you'll keep hearing us talk about is keeping mobility, not having anything tight, but like being light. There's something to be said to that too, because when you keep adding layers and adding layers, it gets heavy. And then you got all your tungsten beads, and that's heavy. And you want to stay as light as possible. So those are really nice. But as soon as you have wind, you need something to cut wind, because if you don't have something to cut wind, I don't care how many layers you have, you're going to get cold. It's going to cut right through you. And there's a big difference between, you know, 26 degrees with a 5-mile-an-hour wind and 26 degrees with a sustained 15. It's not even the same ballpark. So wind is, you need to know your wind as well as temps. Also, you know, we'll talk a little bit about this throughout the presentation, but weather-wise, you're also going to want to pick your days, you know, accordingly to what type of weather fish is good in the winter, and we'll talk a bit about that. But as far as layering is concerned, I think, Zach, did we cover all our bases here?
Yeah, pretty much. Lots of hoods, lots of hoods, and a fleece neck warmer. If I can keep my neck warm,
Yep,
and my head covered, I'm good.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's where
there's always some degree of, you know, coldness, but, you know, being comfortable and, you know, having it not like take away your dexterity and your mobility. You know, when you're fishing a day that's like, you know, you start at 17 degrees and it's going to be 24 of the high. Yeah, you're going to be a little cold, but there's acceptable levels, you know. Once you go into the loss of mobility and dexterity, that's no good. So lots of hoods, neck warmer. And, you know, if I'm moving around a lot, if I'm hoofing it to the next spot, even if I'm, you know, comfortable when I start hoofing it, a lot of times I'll take my hat off and take my hoods off to release some heat so I don't start sweating. If you're hoofing it to the next spot and you start sweating in the process, bad news, because when you get there, you'll be fishing for 10 minutes and all of a sudden, that's when you're going to go into the unacceptable levels.
Yeah, even layering down, guys, like, you know, when we're ice fishing or whatnot, oftentimes we're walking out in darkness and it's freezing cold. We're stripped down to like 2 layers, because once you start moving, you're going to have heat. But the problem is if you're over layered, you're going to sweat really bad. And that's what you're trying to keep. That's what you're trying to stay away from is sweating, right? And getting wet. So take a couple layers off if you got to do like a long walk in, which in some cases that's the case because gates are closed and so forth. So that's real important.
Yep. And if you do find yourself in a situation where you sweat, when you get there, before you even get in the water, I'll literally just like take all my upper layers off and be there in the 20s, shirtless for like 2 or 3 minutes and dry off, and then layer back up, because you will freeze out as soon as you get in the water if you sweat on your walk in. And, you know, sometimes you're walking through a foot of snow to get there. That's a lot of exertion. So if you over layer and then you overexert, that's going to be a short day.
Right. All right. I think we can move on
Yeah,
here.
totally.
We're going to answer questions.
Yeah, let me
during this phase.
just go through some of the stuff in the chat window. I think you guys covered a lot of the stuff that people were asking about. I will say Lay Smith talked about studs. He said cold cutter also makes good screw and studs. Questions about how to keep your feet warm. I think there was one comment in here that I want to mention. Somebody said, you know, they wear a size, Chris Dolnack said, I wear a size 10 shoe. My summer wading shoes are a size 11. My winter wading shoes are size 12 to accommodate thicker socks. Is that something that you think is a common thing?
Yeah,
you know?
definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you guys know who you are that might need to do that. I mean, you know, some people are, they can't fit much more in their boot, you know, in the spring and summer. And if that's you, then yeah, you're going to want to get another boot. You know, if you're on the no, I have plenty of room side, then yeah, you might be able to get away with it. But bottom line is you want to have room.
Yeah.
That's the bottom
line. Chris Wald mentioned the foot warmers, but he also, I think, mentioned these adhesive body, you know, warmers that Zach was mentioning. And he said he called them kidney warmers, which I can relate to. I mean, you know, anything in the midsection where you're warming your midsection sounds like a good idea. Beth, who's a skier, Beth is our treasurer, by the way. She doesn't fish, but she skis, and she just recommended hitting a ski shop because they obviously have the layer, you know, the light wicking layers and socks and such. So I think she's right on. I think a ski shop offers many things that we can take advantage of. Let's see. Joe Hovius, zip front waders. That's what you need for.
Yeah.
Let's see if there was a Fish Monkey. Ben Bernicki says Fish Monkey makes an affordable wool glove, fingers and no fingers. Argon down pants with fleece pants inside. That'll keep you warm. Let me see if there's any other questions here. Here's a yes, Joe. Sweaty feet get cold quickly. Keep them dry. Absolutely. I think you guys covered so much. I think
one thing I want to add with, and I don't know if Zach feels the same way, but the heat warmers like against your body are cool because you can get at them and you can move them if you're overheating. But if you put them in your feet and they're not the longer ones, if they're just a few hours, if it gets too hot, your feet are going to sweat. And then as it starts to cool off, now you're really going to be in big trouble. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword with those. So just be wary of that. Zach, you kind of agree with that?
Agreed. Yep.
Yeah, I think that covers the questions that we had. So
Cool.
if you guys want to move to the next segment, yeah.
Sure. So we're going to do, we're breaking up the winter into 3 sections. And we're first going to go with early winter, which pretty much, you know, I think, Zach, we're saying coming out of kind of like end of November, right?
Yeah.
All the way through December, we're going to call early winter.
Yep.
During this period, you know, fish spawn all through November. It may, you know, end of November might not be as hot and heavy as it is in early November, but there's still that kind of going on, tapering off, and you have post-spawn fish. And spawning is really taxing on fish. There's a certain amount of stress that comes with it. Excuse me. They burn a lot of you know, just I mean, the females thin out. It's really wearing on their body, on the fish. It's just a rough time for them. Oftentimes, you know, some fish will die after spawning just because of the stress. So there's this post-spawn almost like a recovery period where I think Zach and I both agree that like the big fish, not so much disappear, but you can find them, but they're not like as eager to feed, and they're really just trying, I think, to get back to normal.
Yeah, and they're dropping back to water types that
Right.
you have a very good possibility of spooking that fish, so you're never going to catch them.
Yeah. Like, I know Zach was on some really good fish post spawn with winter caddis, and it just so happens that that's the food available to them in these areas where they're kind of hanging out in this water type that Zach's talking about. And it just super spooky water. Like, you have to be incredibly stealth, you have to be on your A game. It's a super long drift to get to some of these fish just because the water's super slow and you can't get close to them, type thing. So it's a tough time of year. But Zach, you and your boys were able to get into some good fish during
Yeah,
this.
my sons and I were able to get into some good ones.
You want to talk about that just a little bit, like
yeah, sure.
techniques you're using?
We're definitely in some slower water, and we were standing up and across from fish, and I was teaching my 10-year-old son how to cast and feed down across drift while moving the fly just enough. Because if those winter caddis have a wake, they won't eat it. But if it's a dead drift, they're not going to be as eager to eat it, because those natural winter caddis they're skittering down and across to get to the banks. So I was teaching my 10-year-old son how to fish a 20-foot leader with 7X tippet down and across, feeding about 30 yards into the fish that we were presenting to. And my 10-year-old is a sponge right now, so he was able to hook and land a 20-inch brown on his first winter outing. So that was pretty,
which is awesome for that. Yeah, for that time period, is excellent, because it's very challenging. I mean, there's certain points throughout the year, time gaps and transition periods, when it's easier to get big fish than other times. And that, that transition of post spawn into, let's say, mid-December, it can be kind of tough.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I drop back and focus on dry flies.
Right.
During that time, I think a lot of the big fish are localized in those slow and deep kind of areas, and along comes a food source like the winter caddis, where, man, for whatever reason, those big fish love them. Yeah,
there's not too many times when distinctists start, they start popping the winter caddis and fish ignore them. Doesn't really happen, man. When those things are on the water, they eat them.
Yeah,
so
if they're in decent numbers, at least.
Yeah.
You might see mornings where it's 33, 34 degree water temperature and a few bugs, and then they won't really. But if they're popping in numbers, you're going to see fish on top on them.
Yeah,
barring high winds.
Winter caddis is very specific to the Farmington. I don't think there's like a ton of rivers that have winter caddis. Zach, do you find that the hatches are better, with overcast days, or kind of high sun days with winter caddis? I mean, I feel like there's always that curveball where, there's just a lot of numbers of them on a day.
Yeah, if it's an overcast day, I feel like it gets going later in the morning. But if it's going to be a sunny day and the wind is not picking up, too much, I feel like they'll be going. If you could see your rod tip, you're going to start to see fish rising, especially if it's going to be a fast spike in air temp. If it's going from like, mid-teens until like 32 by 9, 10 a.m., it's going to be a good morning. But it'll start a little early, and it just, you know, then you're going to be, it's just going to be more focused, I feel like, on those sunny days. But if the wind's picking up, you know, by 7, 8 a.m., you can do it, but probably focus on another day. You know, it's not going to be hot and heavy. The best days I found are when a snowstorm is on its way in. So if you get one of those, you know, low pressure, you know, around freezing, you know, by 7, 8 a.m., and the wind is not picking up, it's one of those slow moving systems. I've had some epic dry fly fishing while, you know, that snowstorm is coming in.
Have you been able to dial in and see if that's pressure related, like on the drop of pressure? Because often when storms
you know
moving in,
what?
you can have a drop of pressure. You don't think it has anything to do with
I
that?
feel like it does, but there's conflicting views on, you know, that size, you know, that volume of water isn't impacted, you know, by the air pressure as much as, say, the ocean would be, you know. I talked a lot about that with Tori Collins, but, you know, a lot of people say that, you know, when those pressure systems are coming in, oftentimes it's cloudy, so it's low light. But I've had cloudy days where a snowstorm's not moving in that aren't anywhere near what I see when that snowstorm is moving in. So you do the math. What else could it be?
And so like dry fly fishing, you know, I tend to try to use the heaviest tippet that I can always get away with.
Yeah, me too.
But, and a lot of times on the Farmington, it's not often times that I drop below 6, me personally.
Yeah.
But
that water,
you know,
type.
this is one of those times where,
Yep.
you know, if you're in that really slow water, you are going to have to drop to 7 if you're throwing like 20s, you know, like, especially with educated trout, that may be one of the times where you got to drop down. Right,
yeah,
Zach?
you know what I'll do is I'll fish 6. You know,
As a
because I'm
starting
there.
point.
Yeah, as a starting point. When I get there first thing in the morning, I can barely see my fly. I start with 6. I've tried 5, not much luck. I wish, but not much. But I start with 6, and as soon as they start refusing me, when, you know, when that sun's coming up, then I'll switch to 7, and that usually is gonna be the difference.
Right. All right. So like moving on a little bit and more about entomology. So through late November, early December, you have the, you know, obviously the winter caddis are going, what we're talking about. You'll also notice if you're seining that you'll see hydropsyche or caddis larva in the drift usually. And you will see throughout December, immature Hendrickson nymphs. And
Which
I have always found
a bunch of fish on those.
Yeah, I've always found in the winter with Hendrickson nymphs, I feel like you might want to have like a good assortment. Like you're not just going to throw like a pheasant tail and that fly is going to work. And you might catch a few fish on it, don't get me wrong. But, you know, Zach, I know you have very specific patterns right now, one that's working really well. I have very specific patterns. Me for the winter, you use your pattern in the spring, I know. But I do think, you know, drift is obviously really important, but certain flies are going to outperform others. Agreed?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So you know, rifling through a bunch of, because these immature Hendrickson, Zach, they're like 16s, even 17s, right? Like they're in that range. So you want a good assortment. You know, maybe you can try some hot spots or more natural looking flies, but you know, when you're seining and you're matching up to these flies, you know, you want to have your proportions of your fly right and have, you know, the right silhouette in the water and all that stuff. But you might have to rifle through a bunch of patterns to find the one that they're going to respond well to. But if you can usually dial in and you start whacking fish like Zach was whacking fish the other day on a immature Hendrickson, usually that fly is going to perform through that time period of when those bugs are around. And some days they might not work as well at others, and another
Yeah, you
fly
want
might slide in.
some kind of sun to peek out.
Yeah. But generally speaking, that fly is usually going to produce well for a little while.
Yeah, I produced right through March with that practice hatch kind of drift that they do during the
Right.
midday.
Yep.
And that's another thing that should be said is when those bugs are in the drift, I feel like a lot of guys are fishing way too deep. So those bugs are actually coming up in the water column. So I'll be fishing mid water column and catching plenty of fish. So
Yeah, because
it's not always about being anchored to the bottom in the winter.
Right. A lot of these
guys
flies
say.
will hit migrational drifts, or they'll ride the currents. And when that happens, they're not necessarily on the stream bottom. So one thing you'll hear Zach and I probably talk about throughout discussing different techniques and stuff is, changing parts of the water column that you're fishing to see how fish are responding to. But also, areas where you might catch fish, water types where you might catch fish in the spring on Hendrickson nymphs, although that might be good Hendrickson water, that may not be good in the winter. So you have to think, you got to think like more gentle flows, areas where, they don't have to expend a lot of energy to hang in and feed in, but yet there's still plenty of food there. So, finding that right water type is really important, just because, Zach and I could say, hey guys, we caught fish on immature Hendrickson nymphs yesterday. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to go out to any pool and catch fish on Hendrickson nymphs. There's a very specific water type that you need to know how to target. Hendrickson nymphs tend to like smaller gravel, pebble size, where like stoneflies, some certain stoneflies like larger rocks and so forth. So you want to know your entomology as well.
Hendrickson nymphs also like wood.
Yeah.
So if I pick up a big branch out of the river that's been in the river for a while, especially come March, there could be hundreds of them on one branch.
Yep.
So
totally.
A lot of dead wood, above you, small gravel, gentle riffle with a drop off into some deep water that's connected to deep water.
Yep.
You're probably going to find some migrational drift.
Yep.
And targeting them mid water column.
Yeah, and like I find the Hendricksons too, like when you get these spikes in temperatures that occur, especially on like high sun days, clear bluebird skies, and especially when there's snow on the ground, because whenever there's snow on the banks, or that's added reflected light going into the water, and you don't necessarily have to have a warm air temp. That's not what we're talking about. Warm air temp will actually go against you when there's snow.
And it'll melt the snow too much, and then it'll drop
you won't
that
get that
water
spike.
temp, and you won't get that spike. So
right,
if it's like 31, 30, no wind, bluebird day, ideal for that.
Yeah, you're going to get a lot of bug activity during that spike time. And that's where, Zach's saying with this deep water close by, a lot of these fish can slide up onto these gravel shelves and move up into feeding lanes and feeding positions when that's water temp spike occurs, when the bugs start moving around. So, where you're fishing and when is extremely important. Huge. And also flows. So
yeah, and something about the flows I don't think enough people pay attention to is what the ratio is: tailwater release versus still water or still river freestone stream flow. If it's half and half, it's going to be it's going to be a slower day than if it's 2/3 to 1/3, meaning Farmington, the West Branch
release.
Yeah. And take into account whether they're releasing from the East Branch, which there's no gauge on that. You gotta go look.
Right.
And to, you know, how much snow is on the ground, and look at Morgan Brook and, you know, the other brooks like Cherry Brook and stuff, and how much ice do they have in them? How, you know, what's the weather been like, you know, as far as making those water temps turn into ice, you know? So the where and when is huge. And
Sure.
you know,
So we mentioned caddis larvae are also around. Even though there was caddis larvae around, you know, it was in that time period, like recently, where these post-spawn fish, like Zach and I said, the bigger ones were dropping back. So I wasn't really taking personally any big fish on caddis larvae, although fish were eating them because they were around, very few and not big. Same thing with stones, you know, eggs will continue to produce throughout the winter until they hatch. You want to fish those in early midwinter. I like to fish those when there's a bit of a flow bump, just something to dislodge the eggs and kick them up and stir them around a little bit. But that's a really good, you know, pack of protein for them to get a hold of. It's ingrained in their brains, like eggs are a great meal. So you want to keep them honest with eggs, I think, as well. Midges are really important, and this kind of crosses over into midwinter. But yep. If you're a big fly fisherman, the winter time would be a great time to be more adept at fishing smaller flies, and midges are a great place to start. Your basic midge patterns, I mean, I really don't think you need to get too crazy with your midge patterns on the Farmington. I mean, we have our curveball midge pattern flies, I'm sure, but your typical brassies, your zebra midges, those all produce.
My top midge is nothing more than thread.
Yep.
I don't even have a rib on it.
Yep. There's no need to really get fancy. It's just more about color, size, and where you're fishing them in the water column, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Which brings us a little bit into, I think it's a good transition at this point to talk about kind of technique, because we've talked about entomology. You know, oftentimes in the spring, myself, my clients, we're doing a lot of tight line nymphing. But in the winter, a lot of these fish don't want to hang in the really fast water, and they're pulled back off, you know, into the slower seams and into the slower, deeper water. And in those cases, you know, tight lining might not be the best tool for deploying to catch fish. And oftentimes, you know, Zach and I will turn to throwing indicator rigs. And we do this often on our tight line setups. Zach, you want to walk everyone through just typically how you would run an indicator rig on a tight line setup, what kind of indicators you use? And
you know, I like those airlocks. You know, it's like a thingamabobber with a gasket on it.
Yep.
Easy on, easy off, doesn't damage my tippet, and I just put it, you know, I want to start high in the column. I don't want to be planning on scraping the bottom right away, you know, because if I get into a run and I'm scraping the bottom and hang up first or second drift, and I'm going to alert a lot of fish to my presence. So I'll start a little higher up than I think I am. And, you know, depending on whether I'm fishing an egg pattern or not. So if I am fishing an egg pattern, I want that to be my bottom fly, because I want it to ride in line with my anchor fly, because those eggs are engineered to not come off the bottom. So I'll use my anchor fly, keep that in line and on the bottom. And you're gonna have a lot better results if you're fishing eggs with they're riding right next to the bottom. But if I am fishing, you know, like a stonefly and immature Hendrickson and a midge, I'll have my stonefly on the bottom. But you know, if I'll go through a drift and I'm watching and my indicator is moving the same speed of the bubbles, it's no good. I want it to go slower, because the surface current is slower than the strike zone down where the fish are feeding. So then I'll adjust and get a little longer from there. But I do use tippet rings. Some people frown upon that. I don't like a surgeon system. I think it's material and time inefficient, in my opinion. I use 2mm tippet rings with double Davy knots tied off of them. I don't inline nymph ever, meaning tying off the back of a hook bend. You're going to get your follow hooking rate is going to be 5 times greater. But I make sure that, you know, I'm getting in the strike zone, but I'm not picking bottom aggressively. You know, I think hanging up on Farmington fish is one of the most overlooked things at spooking fish. You know, you're
You
out
mean
there
hanging bottom?
hanging up on the bottom. If I'm sitting there and I'm boom, boom, and I'm setting every time my indicator goes under unnecessarily because I'm not riding just off the bottom, I think you're going to alert a lot of fish of your presence, you know. And
Right.
if it's a heavy bite window, yeah, you're going to catch fish. But if you're looking to catch the fish that Derrick and I are consistently putting in the net, hanging the bottom is bad.
Right.
I try-
Especially wild fish, right, Zach? I mean, a lot of your holdovers and survivors, they're accustomed to people, and when you come into their windows, and they are alert to your presence, they become that much harder to catch. But a wild fish, an alpha wild fish, that fish is toast.
Gone.
You're shot.
Gone.
You're done. So I would tend to agree with this on Zach. You know, disrupting the bottom, alerting fish to your presence. You want to try to stay away from that. And to Zach's earlier point from today, when your flies are in the water, like he was talking about gloves and getting your line tangled in your hands, and you know, if that's happening and you're indicator nymphing or you're Euro nymphing and you go slack and you drop the flies on the bottom, guess what? You're going to hang bottom. So when your flies are in, you always need 100% concentration when your flies hit the water. That's one thing that I try to ingrain in some of my clients is like, as soon as the flies are in, do not fiddle with anything. 100% focus on your offering. That's it. Yep. So sometimes, you know, in most cases, I think Zach and I are fishing tight line systems and we throw indicators on. But if it's been a steady, super heavy midge hatch, I might bring out like a regular rod, fly line, and I might fish yarn. But it's somewhat rare. And yarn is extremely sensitive. It's really good in really slow, super spooky water. But you know, it's also, if you're sub-freezing temps, yarn is taken out of the equation because it just locks up and freezes. It's no good. So, you know, definitely, I think our number one indicator is definitely the airlock, right? For right now, that's definitely the way to go, right?
Definitely, and you know, and that's, you know, that stealth property that I'm looking for is the reason I started doing it.
Are you fishing the small and mediums both, Zach, or are you just
small and mediums, depending on, you know, flows and weight of my flies?
Right.
And, you know, if I'm fishing up in the water column, I'm going to fish a small white one if I can get away with it, so it looks like a
more
air bubble, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
If I can get away with it, but if it's low light, it doesn't matter. I don't think.
Yeah, agreed.
But the stealth properties of that indicator nymphing on the tight line, you know, with the tight line rig, you know, the same amount of mends that you'd have to do to achieve the distances of drifts I'm fishing, because I'm fishing drifts that are like
super long.
Sometimes, like, I don't want to over exaggerate, but like 65, 70 yards.
Yeah, you totally could. I mean, and just so everybody knows, when we're talking about our tight lining systems that Zach and I use, we're using mono rigs. We're not using like, you know, competition fly lines or running lines or anything like that. We're fishing straight mono. So just to be a little more clear about that technique and what we're doing.
And for those who don't think that you can cast mono like a fly rod or, you know, like a fly line.
You can.
You can. I cast. People tell me all the time, well, I'm not casting, so I'm not fly fishing. And I cast all day long.
I mean, I can't tell you, Zach, how many fish have we caught on a Euro setup just taking off our nymphs and putting a dry fly on?
Yeah,
like,
it happens all the time.
Yeah,
all the time. Yeah, in the fast water, if I'm nymphing and I see something that spikes my interest, I literally clip my rig off, tie a dry fly on, and cast it just like a fly line.
Yep.
And I hook that fish, I put him in the net, back goes the nymph rig.
Yep. And that's,
Seconds.
you know, not to veer too far off topic here and get into other stuff.
Right.
That's due to the leaders that we used and how we formulate those. You know, we're not just saying you can use any old mono rig system, like an 8-pound system is not going to cut it for you. So there's very specific leaders that we're using that enable us to do that. But so yes, extremely long drifts. You know, we talked about, yep. And when you're changing depths, right? Like oftentimes I'll just clip off some leader material below my cider ring and cut off like a foot if I need to like shorten my system. And you know, if you just feel like your rig's just too long, because if you're like total length like 7-8 feet with your tight line system and you're going to indicator and you're just hanging bottom too much, like you were saying, like I might need to shorten up my rig a little bit, right? So I'll clip below my cider and take off like a foot and tie it back onto the tippet ring and then try that and see if I have the right depth. You change depths like that as well sometimes, Zach? Or
No, I actually keep it on my long piece.
Okay.
And I slide it up and down that. And if I'm having problems with my men's, I like I'll grease actually my cider and a couple few feet of my long piece.
Mm-hmm.
So it rides on the surface and I can mend appropriately. It doesn't get pulled down. But
Okay.
You know, that's me being lazy and not liking cutting off and adding on tippet.
Yeah, I mean that's, you know, whatever's quickest to be effective, because I mean we're moving around quite a bit, so
yeah, we're definitely covering several miles a day. If we're fishing on our own,
oh god, yeah.
I'll hit 8-10 runs sometimes in a day during the winter, any time of year. But
yeah,
I usually find that I get what I'm gonna get within the first half hour. Now I'm not gonna walk off fish if I'm nailing them, but as soon as the run goes cold, I'm gone and I'm going to advertise to fresh eyes.
Right, and because these are spots within the spot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we don't want to continue another 80 yards downstream because we know it's not going to be that good. We're going to move to the next spot that might be much like the one we were just fishing. That's going to be effective. So we do like to cover, you know, ground that is productive water. So I think we covered early winter. We should probably move to questions here and get rolling. See how we're doing on time.
There's quite a few questions. I'll try to start with the first few we have here. When you're not fishing dries, I think we went through this, but you know, you talked about Euro nymphing, tightline, Euro and tightline nymphing. What about dry dropper? Do you ever use that in the winter?
Definitely. That's actually basically all I'm using when I fish that winter caddis hatch. My dropper is my pupa that's riding like, you know, right at the surface or a half an inch under it. So I'll fish an adult. You know, you get those little foam jobbers, the winter summer caddis, the little foam ones.
Right.
So I fish because you know you're never sure what they're on. And it was like the back and forth. Oh, look, maybe they're on this one, maybe they're on that one. So and you know when you're fishing that foam pupa, it's practically impossible. You know, any kind of glare, you can't see that thing. And if you put any kind of like cider on top of it, I've tried it all. It doesn't work. I mean, it might catch a couple stockies, but I'm telling you right now, it's a gimmick. It will not catch the big wild fish. So for my you know, visual aid, I fish that dry fly all the time throughout the hatch. And
so Zach's talking about the winged adult,
the
winter
winged
caddis,
adult that I can see.
and he has behind it the pupa form of that winter caddis.
Yeah,
and
I actually was wondering, you know, size, color, pattern of these winter caddis? Are we talking really small dry flies or?
22, 24.
Ah,
Early part of the hatch, like the first week of the hatch, there'll be a bunch of 20s on the water and you can get away with that. But the you know,
so if you have a size 20 winter caddis, what is your dropper? I mean,
a size 22 pupa.
Yeah.
all right. I
If it's what they want, that's what they want.
Yeah, it's,
obviously no bead, nothing
Oh,
like
no,
that.
no, no.
so
It's
to be
basically
clear,
2 dry flies.
to be clear, the question was, do you dry dropper? And in a way, it is kind of dry dropper because the fly can ride, like Zach said, just below the surface.
Yeah, more
Really,
often than not, it's just below the
this is
surface.
kind of like a double dry fly rig.
Yes.
To be
Got
a little more clear, there's like the only weight on that pupa is the hook.
Got it.
Be
Got
clear.
it. Got
Makes
it.
sense?
You answered my question, and I think some others.
So, but in certain situations, especially really low water, I don't know if you remember that we had that drought winter like 4 or 5 years ago, where the river was at like 55, 60 CFS. The fishing was there, but it was tough, and the fish were eating midges
Below, yeah.
like an inch and a half below the surface.
Yep.
And I was fishing my caddis dry fly as if it was an indicator, like kind of like a yarn indicator. But because I couldn't use yarn because they were scared by it because they were eating so close to the surface and I was fishing glass beaded midges, so not to have too much weight.
Okay.
My dropper off my dry fly was 2 inches, 3 at tops, and I was every once in a while getting fish on the dry fly, but more often than not, I was getting fish, 2 inches below the surface with a glass beaded midge in really low water. So I switch back and forth depending on what the hatches, are doing, and what the water type is like. So, every once in a while, I know you see it where, they'll leave a ring, but they won't leave an air bubble, and you'll just see their dorsals and tails come out of the water. And if a fish doesn't leave an air bubble behind when it's surface feeding, a fish feeds through cavitation, so they suck all the water in around their prey. So if they suck something off the surface, they're going to take a little bit of air into their mouth, and that's going to come out the back of their gill plate into the rise form. So if you're seeing them doing that dorsal fin, tail fin kind of, they're definitely eating something right under the surface. And a very, very short dropper off of the back of one of those winter caddis dry flies, it won't spook them because they think it's a bug, and it'll be at the right depth. So I recommend a CDC pattern because you can see the hell out of it from a long distance.
Yeah.
You just got to treat it properly. There's a bunch of CDC safe, pre-treats out there that will, because a lot of people's complaints with CDC that I hear over the years is, well, I catch one fish on it and it's done. So if you pre-treat it properly, and then, another thing I see is people using those shake and bake. They close the lid on it. First of all, it's terrible for light tippets because it crimps it. And when it crimps it, they see that it bends the light refracts through that crimp. They can definitely see it. So if you use I buy it in bulk from a chemical company now. It's just fumed silica. But if you have that jar, that application jar of the frog's fanny, it gives you the ability to scrape out, because that material, it doesn't make it just magically dry off. It adheres to water. That silica adheres to the water. So if you just put it on there, it becomes a paste. But if you get that paste on there and then use that application brush to scrape the shit off of it and remove all that chunky stuff, all of a sudden your fly's brand new.
Man.
So you can see the hell out of it. It lands very softly in the water, which is another thing. If it's not landing softly, and when they're in that just subsurface midge feed, you're gonna spook them all.
Good.
Anyway, let's move on.
Good information. Yeah. So another question here. Do you still see olives around midwinter, or do they slow down considerably after November?
It depends on the day. Yeah, I'm seeing a few here and there. I've seen them, you know, this has been a particularly, I would say, not great year for olives. Neither was last year. But yeah, I've seen them like into the end of December, depending on the year.
So it sounds like it's kind of a pattern you just need to have. Well, obviously,
Oh, always.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
always.
have it all the time. So
Yeah, and you know, they're hatching all year. So even when, you know, when the fish get tough, nothing much is going on. You get a tough fish that's kind of poking his head up once in a while. It's never a bad move to try and feed him an olive pattern.
all right. So you were mentioning egg flies and having them, you know, right above the bottom. Do you weight your egg fly at all? Weighted or beaded it in
Depends on the water type. I feel like, you know, if I really needed to get it down there, I use 2mm beads for a lot of my eggs.
Singles or clusters? What are we talking about?
Singles.
So like with eggs, you know, there's single egg patterns, and then there's cluster egg patterns, and they both work, but sometimes one better than the other. So just to be clear here.
So next question, do you ever use a drop shot rig? If so, how do you rig it?
Drop shots, that's a specific indicator rig. And drop shot is a good indicator rig. It's very water specific that you use it in. And typically in the winter, you can do it. I prefer not to do it anymore. I mean, 15 years ago, I did a lot of drop shotting with tungsten putty and split, but that was before, you know, we were kind of tight lining. It's a drop shot rig is good in fast or transitional water. It's good for getting small flies down deep and knowing exactly where they are in the water column and having complete control over how high off bottom they are.
Or super snaggy water. I'll drop shot when it's really snaggy water.
Yep. But in the winter, I wouldn't say it's a go-to rig for me anymore.
Okay. What rod specifically are you guys using?
The Contact, Thomas & Thomas Contact 2, which I was actually honored to be able to help in the development of over the past couple of years. Basically customized a rod for myself. It's awesome. It does everything I need to do. It's the 11-foot, 2-inch, 3-weight contact nymph rod by Thomas & Thomas.
Derrick, what about you?
I use the same thing.
Huh, there you go. And you know, their advertising is perfect because it says, this is the rod you will eventually own.
Yeah, it's pretty pretentious, but it's totally true.
So then Joe Hovius asked, you had mentioned how you are casting with this Thomas & Thomas with mono.
Yeah.
What weight mono are you using? What is your leader rig for that?
Well, if I'm going to be...
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, really loaded. It's situational. You know, when it gets tough in the, you know, I'm going to be doing a lot of tight line specific. I'll be either on 10 or 12 pound amnesia as my main part of my leader, and tapering down into, you know, 1X and then to 4X lighter material, and down to 6X if it's, you know, small flies, tight line specific. But for my all around rig, where I could be doing streamer fishing, nymphing, tight line nymphing, indicator nymphing, and some dry fly fishing, I like the 15 pound amnesia.
Okay.
To blood knotted to 12, then to 1 to 4. So I keep my taper pretty, you know, it's pretty short actually. So because I don't want any knots coming through my guides while I'm casting, or you know, even with that knot sense stuff on there, it's you're gonna get some clicking through your guides with those knots. So I don't love knots coming through my guides until I'm fighting a fish and
Yeah,
landing them.
that's a good answer to a question I think that Bill Hansen have in terms of, you know, how do you build your leaders? So Mark, your question about is there a is there a website for tightline? There are tons
Tons of them.
tons of them, and maybe we'll put those in the YouTube link, or even I could even do that as a blog post after this presentation.
I have a online e-commerce store. It's called farmingtonflies.com.
Okay.
And we sell Euro rigs
Great.
that are pretty specific to, you know, what Zach is talking about here. My system is pretty much the same. My taper to my leaders, especially on these, may not be as aggressive as Zach's tapers, but you know, if you're looking just for a quick hit, that's, you know, you can get those farmingtonflies.com. So
Yeah, and you know what? One thing you'll find, you know, is you can go to one guy who's very successful, another guy who's very successful, and another guy who's very successful, and all three of their systems will be very different.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's about what, you know, what works for you and your type of cast, and just, you know, is efficient for you. So
Yeah,
while I don't want to say, you know, some of those Euro nymphing sites are, you just got to find what's right for you. I feel like I was sorting through a lot of BS.
there's always a lot of BS out there.
So another question: do you keep the sighter on when indicator fishing? So, and I think
I
the question
do.
comes,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. So in other words, if you're switching up, you know, tight lining you just put your
right on the long piece of the fluorocarbon. That's what I put it on.
got it.
And
Okay.
not only does it doesn't spook the fish, one, but two, it also lets you see your bellies, so you can mend appropriately for those long distance drifts.
Okay, and the next question, and I actually like this question because I've gone back and forth on this. When you're doing a double dry, do you tie the dropper in line, or do you tie like the main dry fly off a tag?
I've done both. I prefer off the tag.
Yeah.
But when I'm being lazy, I just do it off the end.
Yeah,
especially when I'm pretty damn sure they're just going to be eating the pupas.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just using it for an indicator.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. If I think they're going to hit that dry, I'll put it on a tag.
Yeah.
If I think they're going on the dropper, I'm like you. It's easier just to tie it off the hook. Okay. How about how long? And this is a loaded question. How long is your dropper line from the dry?
With the winter caddis?
Yeah.
About a foot and a half, somewhere in there.
Is that
I find that, yeah, I don't want too much. So I found that if there's multiple bugs within a short, you know, space, it gets them juiced up. You know what I mean? They think the hatch is building, whereas if I have them too far away from each other, then I can't, you know, then the rise radius that I have to set on is much greater, because
Yeah.
a lot of the time
You're not sure if they took your fly or not, if it's
Yeah.
further away.
So I have to set every time I see a rise within the radius of the distance of that tippet.
Okay, that makes total sense.
So if I'm
Right.
if I'm too far away, I'm gonna miss a lot of takes.
A lot of fish, yeah. All right, so here's another question from, and it's either Dave Zerwicki or Dave Shaw. I'm not sure which. But what does the immature Hendrickson nymph look like? And I actually wanted to ask this question.
So
Just a small Hendrickson.
yeah, it's small Hendrickson nymph. It's a Ephemerella family style nymph. It's a crawler. You know,
Is there
it's
a
little
color
bit
we should
molded
think
on the-
about?
They're dark brown.
Dark
Yeah.
brown.
Yeah, dark brown. They do have splashes of like olive or even amber or pinkish color in their abdomens, but more so as they get older.
Yeah.
But they're just a dark nymph, you know.
Okay. All right. The size. Oh, that's the other size of those is Dave.
16,
That's
16, 18.
16, 18.
17 if you want to get
16 to 17 to be
I have a whole bunch of 17 hooks. Yeah.
They
So-
do make them.
So that's the end of our questions on that.
Okay.
You guys are awesome.
So what time does this Zoom presentation shut off at? Do we have carte blanche or?
Yeah, you got. You know, I mean, if you
Okay.
want to keep talking, we still
All right.
have 86.
Go for it. Just
All right.
talk
All right,
as long
just-
as you want.
We can rip if we need to, but we covered a lot in the early winter section, so we could rip a lot faster through these
We
next.
still have 86 people on. We had a total of 99, which was up against our limit. So we still have a considerable amount of people that are still really interested in what you guys have to say.
Cool.
All right,
And-
so
and I want to talk about what marks the difference, or the time, the switch over from early winter to middle winter. And my marker for that is usually, that second really heavy freeze that we get, when it gets down into the single digits, if not negative numbers. The first one, it gets it down, but the fish are still pretty active. It's usually that second one that comes that brings that water temp and cool, it cuts down deep into the lake and gets those water temperatures at the bottom of the lake down around 34, 35. And that pretty much marks the middle winter start for me, and the water that I'm going to be focusing on and the times of day that I'm going to be focusing on them and the way that I'm going to be fishing them.
Yeah, Zach,
Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. To people that may not be paying attention to, water temps as closely as Zach or I would, I think we'll just say midwinter, January, like around that time.
Yeah, it's usually the
right?
end of December, but by the second time,
Right,
the second one
right.
comes. End of December,
So
beginning of January.
that's kind of the time period I think we're going to talk about here. And you started talking a little bit about bite windows, Zach. What are the types of bite windows that we see? There's you were mentioning, there's the early morning bite window.
Pretty much every single day of the year, there's a first light and last light bite window. And I've caught fish at sun up, I can barely see my indicator, and it's 12 degrees outside, yet I'm catching them on nymphs. And that'll last like, half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour until that sun gets on the water. And then
there's a little bit of a lull.
Definite lull.
Yeah.
Yep, a definite lull happen when that happens. And you could go hours without a fish. And then all of a sudden, you start to get that spike. So instead of a low light driven bite window, it's a temperature spike driven bite window. And then they'll switch on and you can catch 20 or 30 fish, if not 40, from 11 to around 2:30, 10:30 to 2:30, sometimes 3, depending on what the air temp's doing. But usually when that sun gets off the water, there's another lull. And then I find that, you can go another couple runs, if not, an hour or two without even an eat. But then as the sun is, setting and the light is getting low, I find another good bite window in that last hour right before dark. Even if it's like in the low 20s, high teens, I still get a good bite window right before dark.
For sure. And that's, just to be clear, that's usually when it's really hard to see your sighter.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're striking on sixth sense type stuff in those conditions, and there's fish there. It's even through late. You'll hear about us talk about that late bite in late winter too, because it carries through really well through that. But so let's talk like midwinter. super extreme cold temperatures. And this is like when the river is like slushed out, and some days you may not even have a window of opportunity where the slush doesn't go away. And other days you might have 3 hours or 2 hours where, you know, just over midday towards the back end of the day, you know, the slush, you're clear as slush. On these days, I've historically found that you can take some really good fish, big fish, alpha fish. And, you know, these big fish, they're a lot more hardy than smaller fish. And most of these fish are wild. You know, they can feed in harsher conditions. And Zach, I think you mentioned to me, you know, big fish have to eat. They have
Yeah,
to keep up their
they have to
calories.
maintain their body weight, you know.
Right.
So that a smaller fish can go several days without eating if they're in that kind of.
And the colder it is, they definitely like slow down. They don't want to work as hard, but that just makes a better opportunity for you taking, you know, a big alpha fish on a nymph, right? On a bug where that fish might be, you know, most of the time feeding on meat or whatnot. So it's definitely one of those opportunity windows to do something really special. But it's not for the faint of heart. It's brutal conditions. And you're working hard, usually only for a few fish. Like usually those slush days, usually, not all the time, but you know, it's more about quality, quantity.
Yep.
You know,
I'll work all day long for that one eat,
but it's a good one.
It's a 22,
yeah,
21, 22-inch fish.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. So, you know, if you're good with the cold weather and you want an opportunity at really good fish, you know, you have to be in the right water types, but that's a really good opportunity for you to do something special. Just a little heads up. Entomology wise, it's somewhat much of the same that we've been talking about. You know, your midges,
more midge heavy though.
Yeah, for sure. Midge, and even heading into late winter, midges are really good, and especially when the midges cross with the early dark stones, which I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but again, you know, you want to up your game on small flies. I mean, it's more of a staple to catch. I think you can catch really good fish on midge, but for the most part, my midge fish, you're getting a lot of fish.
A lot of fish.
Yeah.
I've had guys who come out and, you know, they're expecting to catch one, maybe two fish on a half day, just hoping to get their technique for the winter down. And 2 hours in, we've got 25, 30 fish. It's almost every drift when they start eating those midges.
Yep.
And whereas I found that, you know, a lot of times you want a perfect drag-free drift with an indicator. You try not to move that indicator much, right? I found that a lot of times
the trigger
making it bounce a little bit actually animates that midge and makes it start to look like it's coming up to the surface to eat. Right. And while moving that indicator a little bit, have almost like a sloppy drift, if you will catch a lot more fish than just a truly dead drifted mid drift.
I've noticed that as well. It's almost like a Lysen ring lift. It's you know, these fish, these midges start to climb and it's a trigger. And, you know, if you're noticing at the end of your drift with an indicator, right when you're coming into contact and you start to get drag, that's when your fly's lifting up. And if that's where you're hitting fish every time,
then you recreate that all the time.
Then that's when you want to deploy that technique that Zach's talking about, that kind of style. So it's the same thing if you're tight lining with, you know, your Henriksen nymphs or something, and, you know, you find that they're taking it at the end of your drift. It's because of the lift. So you want to set up on where you think fish are going to be with that target area in mind. It's the same thing. You know, if they're on a trigger like that, you have to adjust your target area. When you're nymphing, you might say, okay, right in front of me is my target area. That's the highest percentage chance of where I'm going to draw a hit. When they're triggered on something like that, you might have to adjust that. That's all. Yep. But yeah, that's a good tip, Zach.
A lot of
And
times,
also, I find when, I don't know about you, but when I'm taking those, you know, when I'm having those 30 fish, 40 fish days in the winter, I find more often, like I catch fish on tight lining systems with midge, but usually my
indicator.
days that I'm really pounding it
is indicator.
is with the indicator.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
like
agree.
another good fly I do well on that's is a winter warrior, which that's a pattern that can represent midges, winter caddis larva, and even like real small immature stones. Sometimes suggestive nymphs are good as well. But yeah, midge fishing, huge, really important. Other types of flies that might work, Zach, you know, through midwinter. I think we talked about like
olive caddis larva, case caddis, like the
Yep.
little Peking caddis. That's one of the things that I find on those slush days.
Mm.
Big stones or case caddis larva usually take the better fish for me on those.
Yeah, me too.
those
The,
slush
you know,
out
like
days.
those caddis larvae, when we're talking these caddis larvae here, we're talking like size 12 uncased. So a lot of
Or
times,
peeking.
like if you crack a stick open, you'll see these like white grubs type things. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Like as we get into late winter, headed into early spring, I think the case caddis start to really work really well. But for some reason, on those slush days, I 100% agree. You know, those uncased caddis type flies work really well. You know, they're usually thicker, bigger flies than your typical like hydropsyche 14, 16 type deal.
Other than that, though,
I think, yeah, it's not, there's not too much. I mean, it's same kind of tactics or whatever. We want to field some more questions real quick and then we can go into late winter.
Yeah, I think we really don't have too many more other than tips for unfreezing ferrules.
Oh yeah, I was going to say something about that. I mean, first of all, guys, I'll tell you what you don't want to do is you don't want to be in the river and grab your rod mid-rod blank. The first thing I tell clients when I'm getting, you know, with them, especially with Euro rods, is never grab your rod mid-blank.
Yeah.
Like the rods are not meant
nope.
to bend that way. They're meant to bend from the handle, and that's it. You will eventually break your rod if you do that.
Yeah,
in the winter time, you can't put your
back to the bank.
Yeah, you can't put your reel in the water in the winter. Your whole reel will lock up. You have to go back to the bank and take that time to swing your legs, get the blood going, do some jumping jacks like Zach does, clear your guides out, and go back in. It's just something you have to deal with.
Yep. And that's the other benefit of the mono rig is the ice issue.
Not as bad.
It's probably 20% of the issue that you'd have when you're fishing a floating line because of the texture of that floating line and the diameter of it.
Grabs the water.
Yeah, so yeah, it grabs the water, and it's, you know, it's more space that's going through your guide. So the time in between clearing out that ice is shorter because it takes a lot shorter of a time to fill those guides with ice with that space. So, you know, less texture on that line, and smaller diameter equals less ice issue. I mean, I've messed around with the ice off on my guides. I don't really see a gigantic advantage to it. One thing I see guys doing is they think dipping the rod in the river is a solution. Nope. I think it just makes it worse. It's going to make it better for about 10 seconds, and then it's going to get 10 times worse.
Yeah. And then you're going to get ice around your blank, and then you go to do it again and snap your rod. So
no good.
Not a good idea.
All right. One other question here. And this is from Andrew Dixon. It says, in terms of the cased caddis patterns, will those realistic looking burnt chenille patterns hunt, or are they gimmicky?
Man, I'm trying to make those ones work so hard. I love them. I've burnt a whole bunch of different kind of materials trying to make it look right. Truth be told, the best Peking caddis that I tie is like just a hare's ear one, you know, for the body, like a dark hare's ear or like a chocolate brown hare's ear. I've tied some with pheasants. They work pretty good too.
We'll cover case caddis too in this last section because that's a major part of.
Yeah.
So we'll talk more about
So
that.
we're moving on to that section because we're
Cool.
done with questions.
We are.
All right. Well, let's keep talking about case caddis then. That's one of them. I mean, so Zach, we see different size case caddis. We see the stick caddis,
Yeah.
which those are the big ones. Pinopsyche, yeah, which is the October caddis. And that's, if you pop those open, there's a big clear grub, whitish grub inside. You have those around. I tend to do good with those, more towards the spring when you have really increased flows. What about you?
Yep.
Same.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why, I'm gonna say it, the mop fly. If you haven't fished it.
Yeah.
If you haven't
One of the
fished
things
it,
it represents.
you should probably fish it. One of the
One of the
things it's
things.
representing, I would say, is definitely those. And I think that pattern is a multi-suggestive pattern. I think you're getting a crane fly
larva
representation, and beetle grubs. They beetle larvae are getting washed in the river if you have a heavy flow bump as well, just like an earthworm would. So you're representing three things with one fly. You're advertising to more fish that could be keying on these items. So the mop fly, I hate to say it, but it works.
It works.
It works.
Does. We also get with case caddis, we get caddis that makes their housing or whatever you want to call it, their cases out of like pebbles.
Little pebbles. I think those are the winter summer caddis. I feel like.
Yeah, or are they granum?
They're
They're not granums, are they?
some of them are, but
Yeah.
the winter summer are net spinners.
Okay.
So
Yeah, you'll see. When those are prevalent, you'll see them all over the rocks. And some of those is some of the simplest patterns, like waltz, sexy waltz, stuff like that. Those all work good.
I'm a big fan of the waltz.
Yeah, me too. So that's a good pattern to keep honest in the late winter. You also have your early stone fly nymphs in the late winter. Your paralep nymphs become active.
Black fly larva.
And your small dark stones, those are more like an 18. Those are a lot smaller. They're in different sizes. And of course, midges. So entomology wise, that's kind of what you're looking at. And some of those bugs you can overlap, like Zach was saying, it's always good when you can represent more than one bug at a time with one nymph. And a lot of these suggestive nymphs, simple nymphs, they can do that. Still fishing soft seams in the late winter. You're kind of in a transition period, but it's a good transition period. I feel like the warmer the water gets, the more they turn on. And it's not a bad transition. It's usually a good transition. They're feeding on both ends of it. There's no like stalling in between, I feel like.
Right. And during that time of year, man, as soon as those early stones, they got the smaller black ones, anywhere from like a 26 to a 18.
Yeah.
And the larger, like the brown ones, they're like a reddish brown. They look almost fuzzy, and they'll be wiggling back and forth in the drift. As soon as those things, get into gear.
Those are like a 14, 16. They're early.
Yeah, 14 more so, but yeah, 16 as well. I start fishing up in the water column. Then you're going to see the Hendricksons there on those days when those are there. A lot of those Hendricksons will be on those migrational drifts. So a lot of people will be striking out big time while they're dredging bottom, with whatever style of nymph in there. And I'll be fishing 2 to 3 feet below the surface, light up in the water column, and I'll start taking a lot of big wild fish. And I'll be fishing dry fly, like froggy and transitional water.
Yeah, when those early stones start hatching, I often find, if you look at the anatomy of the pool, you have you have the head, you have a gut, and you have a tail. And I often find, like when early stones are active and I'm indicator nymphing, like Zach said, you have like the deepest part of the gut, and then it will kind of come up. It'll come up shallower. And right on that transition from deep coming up to shallow, I find a lot of fish when early stones are active and that's what they're on, that they prefer that water type.
And they're looking up.
Yeah.
You know, even though they are on the bottom, they're coming up as if they would, you know, be hitting a dry fly, but they're definitely coming up and blasting. I've had fish that'll roll on, you know, because I'll fish a 3-fly rig a lot, and my first fly will be 6 inches to a foot below the surface.
Right.
And they'll bulge on it like as if it's a, you know, they're eating an emerger.
Sure.
But yeah.
And you find with the early stones adding action sometimes, or at the end of the swing sometimes triggers?
Absolutely. A lot of times when I'm fishing those things that are moving, you know, they're animated in the drift. A lot of times while I'm, you know, stripping or elevating my rod tip to keep contact, it's almost like I squeeze the cork of my rod, and it just gives it a little bit of movement.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice. I think most people, when you tell them about incorporating action into a fly, especially a nymph, we're talking about the slightest movement here, guys. We're not talking about rod movements, big movements. You know, even when you're shaking the winter caddis, like we were talking about, like you're trying to make a dry fly dance on the surface, you're almost shaking the rod to the point where you feel like you're not doing anything. Like it's a very fine line. So just a heads up.
Too much movement, nothing.
Doesn't look natural. Yeah.
But yeah, you know,
bite window. Bite window.
Bite window.
In late winter.
The early morning bite window kind of chills out.
Right.
Late winter, and it moves more to, you know, a midday. That's when the midges are going strong.
Yep.
And
the latter part of the day, like towards the end of the day, when, you know, the sun's just dipping down and it's hard to see your indicator or sighter. I mean, I've had 20, 30 fish in an, you know, hour and a half during that period, you know, where it can just really good bite window.
Yeah, especially when there's not a lot of snow on the ground to cause melt, and you had a significant, you know, air temp spike. If you get in those days in the late winters that are coming up in the mid upper 40s, you know, every once in a while, you get one of those. Not windy in the afternoon. There wasn't a lot of snow melt. The fish are going to go crazy.
Right.
You know, they're trying to bulk up after the winter, you know, and it can be a significant bite window. But you also have an opportunity to have some really good fish during that time because of the low light. Something I want to put out there is when I'm fishing that last light bite, almost everything on my rig has pink on it. The first and last spectrum of light that a trout can see is pink. So pink beads, pink hot spots. I'm going to say it again, a squirmy worm, the junk does have its role. Anything with pink in it, or, you know, a very dark silhouette. So it lays down, you know, or very dark in color. So it lays down a hard silhouette. UV, or, you know, fluorescent materials don't hurt to tie with as well during that, but something they can see. And pink just seems to be a good winter color for me. So
yeah, pink's good, you know, early winter. You know, sometimes you build them into like your Hendrickson nymph, sometimes that'll trigger. Pink's just a good color in the winter. You know, on your Frenchies towards the late winter, I'd also say have some Frenchies with like your like fire orange, fire reds. Those will trigger that same type of bite that Zach's talking about. So pink and those types of hot spots during that late bite window is huge. I mean, it makes a major difference as opposed if you were just fishing a dull fly. You know, you're going to get a few fish versus if you're using the right trigger, the right globe right, the right, hot spot, your catch rate goes significantly.
That's
up.
very noticeable.
Yeah.
Almost instantly. But you play around with the color, you
Yeah.
make a fly change, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
every drift, every other drift, you're getting to eat.
So I know we jump in a lot to nymphing because it's like, there's a lot of technical information about nymphing, and Zach and I could talk for days upon days on it. But we also do streamer fish. I mean, just these last few flow bumps we had, Zach was out with clients throwing streamers. I had a small window one day, and I fished an area where I could really land a really big, or have a shot at landing a really big fish on a streamer. And I don't know about Zach, but I mean, those times when I feel like streamers are really produced, that definitely gets me excited, because you can really catch a really big fish on a streamer. And it's nice to not have to be super technical all the time. I think any kind of increase in temperature in the river is going to permit, or the fish will be more likely to move further than they would if it was colder out. But when we're talking about winter streamer fishing, a lot of my retrieves are slowed down. I'm fishing a lot of jigs on a tight line system, and in high water, if it's high cold water, I mean, it's very predictable where the fish are going to be in really high water. But you can't really move around a lot. There's nooks and crannies where it's going to fish good in really high water. When we say really high water, Zach, we're talking 1,000 plus, right? All the way 2,400, something like that.
Yeah, 23, 2,400 is pretty much my cap out.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on how long the flows have been like that, but
yeah,
if I don't know if you remember 8 years ago when that woman went missing and they held the water back for a long time, and then they released it because the cobra hogback was full. It was running at 3,400 for a week, and the fish got acclimated to that flow, and they were feeding like crazy.
Yeah.
But as far as winter, I'd say about 22, 2,300 is my cap out.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with really high flows, water clarity. If it's super chocolate milk, well, that may not be worth it. But there's a certain fine line of visibility where you start to have the upper hand on fish with streamers, and can move something really large. And it's a great opportunity. And we will oftentimes streamer fish in normal flows. For me, it's mostly jig fishing in normal flows. Yeah. But it's definitely within our rotation. Any other tips of advice streamer fishing, Zach, that you say that's winter specific, because we're talking about winter? I mean,
well, just keep it going slow. You don't want to be stripping it you would be. I'm basically throwing it like I would be a nymphing rig, but I'm again employing those subtle rod movements just to give it some kind of life, look like it's injured, and not, the non-escaping prey theory. If it's not going to, if they have a higher probability of eating that and they're not worried about missing it, and it's right close next to them, then they're more willing to open their mouth, Whereas if they got to move 6 feet for it, forget about it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think too, at least maybe for us, or speak for myself, it's important for me to dial into the entomology, because that's going to be the most consistent way to take good fish. So especially during these transition phases where you have to figure out really what flies are going to produce for those immature Hendricksons, or what fly, they prefer. Because some years they're on one fly all over it, and then other years it might be a little colder, and then some flies just work every year.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's great.
I'll have patterns that, That's the only fish, only pattern I'll catch fish on some days.
Yeah.
And hundreds of fish throughout the winter, and then I'll fish with the next winter. I'll catch like 5 fish on it.
Right.
Same exact pattern.
100%.
Crazy.
So I think, you know, at least for maybe Zach and I, it's important for us to dial in on that. And so it does take a lot for us to maybe switch to just focus on streamers for the day. It's kind of like dry fly. Like I'm not going to fish the surface unless there's large, high quality fish
Yep.
eating on the surface. And don't get me wrong, going out and throwing streamers in the winter, if you're not if you don't enjoy the technical aspect of fly fishing, go out and throw streamers. You can catch a really good fish throwing streamers. And you know, you want to have a game plan. You still need a game plan. You got to try different types of flies, different colors, different retrieves, and, you know, deploy your plan of attack. But, you know, the most consistent way to take your pretty good size quality fish throughout the winter is going to be nymphing. Yeah.
Hey guys, this is Mark. This has been easily the best presentation we've had in as long as I've been doing this for the chapter.
Awesome.
This has been absolutely amazing. Mike, you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I just, I have to agree. And being fair to you two, we're going to probably wrap this up because we've been going for 2 hours. And
Right on.
you only agreed to an hour, but I could listen to you guys for an hour more without any problem. So,
I would love to do it again sometime.
this was, well, definitely we'll do that. And you're going to be getting a call from Mark and you guys, because
Yeah.
I'm chomping at the bit here to change some of my strategies after I wrote 3 pages of notes. I don't even know what I'm going to do first, but you guys really did a great job. And I just want to say to all of the visitors that we had tonight, if there's any way that you could let us know if you're Trout Unlimited people or other chapters or just people who follow Derrick and Zach, we'd love to have you join us every month. I mean, whether it's in person or whether it's our, you know, the next presentation that we have, I think we're going to do a saltwater thing in January, and we got another trout guy coming in February. If you want to join us, we would love to have you. This was a great experience for us at CVTU, and I hope the rest of you guys enjoyed it as much as we did.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah.
Zach, I need to talk to you when I sent you a private message. I need some information from you.
Yeah, no problem.
So just to wrap up, CVTU.org is our website. I am recording this. I will cut out some of the nonsense at the beginning if I can figure it out, and I will put it up on our YouTube channel. I will link to Zach and Derrick's websites so that you can all contact them individually if you want to. And yeah, we'll continue to promote you guys online on our Facebook page and consider you part of our circle. This has just been great, absolutely great. I can't wait to get out on the river on Saturday for our ugly sweater fishing.
I'm changing my whole process for Saturday after this presentation.
Well, I'll probably see you guys out there.
All right. Anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
99 folks on the call tonight, and it was great. Thanks a lot, Zach.
Thank you
a lot,
all,
Derrick.
and everyone. Be safe, be well, and happy holidays.
Likewise.
All
Well,
right, guys, have a good night.
bye guys. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
See you guys.
Stay with me. for a
Stay
minute.
safe, man.
Night, guys.
Ladies.
Ladies.
Well,
Hey, there's Dave Sarecki. There's